Hello and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I am your host, Catherine Hadro, in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thank you for joining us. In this week's show, undercover journalist David Daleiden responds to major pro-life news. Former Vice President Joe Biden flips and flips and flips again on a pro-life amendment, and this.
He said, "I think everybody with Down syndrome are angels who walk the earth." And that quote stuck with me through all of my pregnancy and will for the rest of my life.
How one family has experienced great joy in welcoming their baby son with Down syndrome. But first, our top story. The Trump administration announced last week it will ban scientists at the Department of Health and Human Services from conducting medical research using remains from aborted babies. HHS and the National Institutes of Health will not renew a contract with the University of California, San Francisco to fund research involving aborted baby body parts or fetal tissue. The official statement from the HHS department included this: promoting the dignity of human life from conception to natural death is one of the very top priorities of President Trump's administration. HHS will also convene an ethics advisory board to prevent funding for such projects. And here to discuss this major pro-life news out of the Trump administration is Mercedes Schlapp, the White House Director of Strategic Communications. Mercedes is also a Catholic wife and mother and joins us now from the White House North Lawn. Mercedes, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
What sparked this directive from the White House?
Well, I think for some time, the Department of Health and Human Services had been looking into this option of ending fetal research, tissue research, and so it was something that was brought to the attention of the president. The president made this decision. He was the one who said he did not believe that we should use any government funding or using, in this case, fetal tissue research. And that was a key message the president sent. He is someone who has been committed to the pro-life agenda since even his campaign. And this was a significant step that the administration made in ensuring that we weren't going to use taxpayer dollars to fund fetal tissue research that come from elective abortions.
Did the undercover Planned Parenthood videos released by David Daleiden from the Center for Medical Progress in 2015 play a role in this action?
You know, I don't know specifically. I can tell you that Senator Blackburn, for example, shared information with the president regarding her investigation into the use of the selling of fetal parts, which obviously has been so disturbing to watch those images. I can tell you for the president, this is something where he feels very strongly. It is ensuring that we don't use federal funding for abortions. It's why he's taken significant actions, including obviously stopping fetal tissue research from abortions being used in any way by the National Institute of Health, as well as, for example, his decisions that he made on Title X funding, which is, again, making sure that abortion providers wouldn't have access to those funds, which, as we know, would place a dent and have a negative impact on Planned Parenthood.
Should we anticipate to see more pro-life action from the Trump administration when it comes to fetal tissue research?
Well, I think this is a very significant step. This is actually stopping fetal tissue research in intramural projects that are managed by the National Institute of Health, as well as under the current statute, we need to have an ethics advisory board that would be involved in making these decisions regarding any fetal tissue research. So this is very significant in terms of ensuring that the federal funding is not utilized for these purposes. This is about protecting the sanctity of life, and also the fact that we're going to see investments being made of about $20 million to find alternatives to fetal tissue research. That is significant because we want to be able to produce additional models, different types of models, so that we can continue making progress in this area of research, but again, not focusing on fetal tissue research that, as we know, has been used for so long.
Speaking of alternatives, Mercedes, what do you say to critics who claim restrictions on fetal tissue research will hinder medical progress?
Well, I mean, we really haven't seen much in terms of fetal tissue research. And in essence, I think it's critical to be able to find these alternatives, to figure out a better way that we can find breakthroughs in medicine. And part of the reason why this administration is committed to this investment on alternatives. We are focused on ethical research, but we do believe that it is simply wrong to use fetal tissue in terms of that are coming from elective abortions for any sort of research projects that are intramural.
Mercedes, on a different pro-life topic, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden recently flipped on his long-standing support for the Hyde Amendment. What's your reaction to this, and what does it indicate to you?
Well, again, as a White House official, I'm not allowed to comment on the Democratic candidate per se, but what I can tell you is that Democrats in general are now extreme. They are willing to give up any sense of morals and values and even protect the sanctity of life. They have no room in their party for any pro-lifers. And so I think when you look at the fact that Democrats, and so many Democrats, support late-term abortions, as we know, the governor of Virginia going out and saying, well, yes, you can have an abortion after the baby's born, make the baby comfortable. That is something that not even mainstream America agrees with. It is barbaric, as the president has said. It is executing a baby, as the president has said. And there is no room in America to go and support such extreme views on abortion. And in terms of ensuring for this president, as he's explained it so many times, where his goal has been to protect the unborn and ensure that we value every life. And obviously the Democrats are, I think, completely out of touch on this issue of abortion.
Mercedes Schlapp, White House Director of Strategic Communications, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Mallory Quigley is the Vice President of Communications for the Susan B. Anthony list. Mallory, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure, Catherine.
Walk us through this announcement regarding fetal tissue research. What should our viewers know?
That's right. So in this announcement last week from HHS, we had the administration saying that they will no longer send taxpayer dollars to for any intramural, so research that is done on NIH campuses. Okay. We're not funding any more fetal tissue research there, and they've cut off a huge contract with University of California in San Francisco, where they were using body parts of aborted children on taxpayer-funded experiments. We're no longer funding that, and any future research is going to have to be vetted by an ethics review board that Congress is going to set up, and it's great news. It's a victory many years in the making.
Mallory, what will this do to prevent the trafficking of aborted baby body parts?
Well, up until now, $120 million of our taxpayer money has been being spent by NIH on research involving fetal tissue. And so this cuts off the demand. And again, there are alternatives to the hearts, lungs, livers of these babies. It's just such a degradation. These children have been killed, and now to use their bodies for these gruesome experiments, especially when it's not necessary, it's not yielding any good, it's a degradation, and we're stopping that as a nation. That's really excellent.
And do clarify for us, have there been medical advancements from this type of research?
Right. This is, and if you're reading any of the, the mainstream news coverage on this, this fact is being obscured, but there have been no advances from research involving fetal tissue for more than 100 years. Polio, rubella, these vaccines, they are not made using fetal tissue. Research into Zika and HIV, there are alternatives that we can use. The fetal tissue is not required. And our scholars at the Lozier Institute, Dr. Tara Sander-Lee, who I know you've had on before, and Dr. David Prentice, have done extensive research on this. And lozierinstitute.org, there's a whole fact sheet on the reality.
That's a great resource for our viewers. Finally, Mallory, on a different topic, I do want to get your reaction to former Vice President Joe Biden.
Yes.
And his announcement that he is now flipping his long-standing support for the Hyde Amendment. Can you put this into context for us?
Right. Well, the Hyde Amendment, of course, is a decades-old, popular, bipartisan policy that says, hey, we are not going to use taxpayer dollars to fund elective abortion in the Medicaid program. It's saved more than 2 million lives since its inception in the 70s. And about 60,000 lives a year are protected thanks to the Hyde Amendment. And this is something that for many years was supported by Democrats. And in fact, when you look at the polling, we see a third of Democrats identify as pro-life. A majority of Americans oppose taxpayer funding of abortion. This is really his flip, because he has taken now multiple positions in the last few weeks, is really unpopular even with Democrats' own base, not to mention the rest of the country. So it's really troubling now that the entire 2020 Democrat side, the whole field, is uniformly pro-abortion, pro-taxpayer funding of abortion, and this is really an extreme position to take. And they're very out of step with the majority of Americans.
Absolutely. Mallory Quigley, Vice President of Communications for the Susan B. Anthony List, thank you again for being here.
Thanks, Catherine.
The Trump administration announced last week it will not be renewing a contract with the University of California, San Francisco to fund research using the body parts of aborted babies. This is good news. The unborn are human beings equal in worth and dignity. They are not science experiments. That brings us to this week's call to action. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com to send a thank you message to President Donald Trump and Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar for this action to stop taxpayer-funded experiments using aborted baby body parts. You can send your message by going to ProLifeWeekly.com. Once you get to our website, all you have to do is type in your basic information like your name, and your thank you message will be delivered straight to the president and to Secretary Azar. Again, the administration has stopped funding for research that requires the use of aborted fetal organs and tissue. This type of research is a violation of human rights and not something our taxpayer dollars should go towards. Funding for gruesome projects such as these contributes to the trafficking of aborted fetal body parts, and President Donald Trump and Secretary Alex Azar have taken action to stop it. Take the time to send a thank you note to President Trump and Secretary Azar for their action to end this practice. All you have to do is go to ProLifeWeekly.com. Turning now to our next segment, we continue the conversation on research involving aborted fetal tissue, an issue that was first brought to the forefront by pro-life undercover journalist David Daleiden. In the summer of 2015, Daleiden released his undercover work with the Center for Medical Progress, which alleged Planned Parenthood was selling aborted baby body parts for profit. Joining us now to discuss the Trump administration's restrictions on fetal tissue research is David Daleiden himself, the founder and project lead for the Center for Medical Progress. David joins us from our EWTN West Coast studio in the Diocese of Orange in California. First off, David, what is your initial reaction to this news surrounding fetal tissue research?
This is really good news, and this is a big victory for pro-life Americans all across the country who helped elect this administration. What it means is that no longer are taxpayer dollars going to be spent on experimentation on the broken bodies of aborted children from abortion centers like Planned Parenthood in our country.
In your opinion, David, does this action go far enough in preventing the use of aborted baby remains in research?
I mean, certainly you can always go farther, right? I mean, a lot of the activity that's involved in the market for aborted baby body parts, trading in aborted human baby body parts for profit or for valuable consideration is against the law, and ultimately that's a job for the Justice Department to do, not the Health and Human Services Department. So it can always go farther, but I think the new policy changes from the administration announced this past week are very, very good. So I think it's a very, very solid and good foundation to move forward from.
David, it's been almost 4 years since your Center for Medical Progress videos began rolling out. What more have you learned since your videos were released in the summer of 2015?
You know, the more that we look at the harvesting and trafficking of aborted baby body parts, the more horrific the entire topic becomes. As you've seen the op-ed that I just published in the Washington Examiner this past weekend, looking at some of the research projects, some of the experimentation with baby body parts that's been done just in the past couple of years, published since the release of CMP's undercover footage. You have information about NIH-funded, government-funded researchers who are doing experiments where they're harvesting livers from born-alive infants, infants who are alive at the time of delivery, aborted through a labor induction method in order to get the freshest, most pristine quality livers for human transplant experiments. And this is all done according to guidelines set out by the FDA. Which are guidelines of a tissue product quality level that groups like Advanced Bioscience Resources, one of the longest time contractors with Planned Parenthood for harvesting body parts, are well known to provide. So the deeper you go down this rabbit hole, the more that you start to look at it, the story gets bigger, the violations get more extreme. And the urgency for agencies like the Health and Human Services Department that have oversight authority and agencies like the Department of Justice that have law enforcement authority to step in and do the right thing and stop the abuses becomes more and more important and more critical.
Absolutely. And finally, David, you have been facing a number of lawsuits following the release of your undercover videos. I know our viewers are interested. What's the latest on your case?
Sure. So the latest is that Planned Parenthood and their allies are going to have to start to face the music of this whole ridiculous persecutorial production that they have orchestrated. Their top abortion doctors, their top executives have started to be deposed under oath in the lawsuits that they brought against me, and some of their people are going to have to take the witness stand if the bogus criminal prosecution from Kamala Harris moves forward in San Francisco. So stay tuned. There's a lot of really good information and a lot of really damning information for Planned Parenthood that has come from that process already and will continue to come out in the months ahead. So stay tuned for that.
And I'm sure we will be talking to you soon again. David Daleiden, project lead at the Center for Medical Progress, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
When we come back,
he said, "Didn't you know you had the choice to abort your baby? You could have saved yourself and not been going through this had you had an abortion."
The family says yes to life despite facing pressure from doctors. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I am your host, Catherine Hadro. Former Vice President and Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden caves to the abortion lobby on an amendment he's long supported. That's this week's Speak Out segment. After supporting the Hyde Amendment throughout his long political career, Biden appeared last month to reverse his support of it. The Hyde Amendment bans the use of taxpayer funds for elective abortion procedures. This is what Biden recently told an ACLU volunteer.
But I'm glad you just said you would commit to abolishing the Hyde Amendment.
Right now, it has to be, it can't stay.
Thank you.
But then last week, the Biden campaign told NBC News the former vice president still does support the Hyde Amendment. Immediately, Biden was criticized by his fellow Democratic candidates and the abortion lobby for supporting the pro-life measure. The very next day, Biden reversed course once again, telling an Atlanta audience he now wants to repeal the Hyde Amendment. The former vice president, who identifies as Catholic, has abandoned the teachings of the Church on life in favor of the abortion lobby. This extreme position on abortion not only puts Biden out of step with the church, but with the American electorate. According to a Marist poll released earlier this year, a majority of Americans, 54%, oppose the use of taxpayer funds to pay for elective abortion procedures. The Hyde Amendment has saved 2 million lives since its establishment. It's historically been a bipartisan supported measure, one that Biden was in favor of throughout his political career. And while flip-flopping on an issue is a political no-no, I hope the presidential candidate considers flipping on the Hyde Amendment just one more time, this time to support life. Remember, there is something you can do to counter today's culture of death. Follow this week's call to action. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com to send a thank you message to President Donald Trump and Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar for their action to stop taxpayer-funded experiments using aborted babies' body parts. It's estimated that nearly 70% of babies prenatally diagnosed with Down syndrome are aborted in the United States alone. For this week's Pro-Life Focus, we introduce you to a family that looked past the fear of one extra chromosome to see the beauty of life.
I knew something was up in the back of my mind. I knew something was going on, but that's still startling news to receive, no matter how prepared you may be.
When Jason and Erin Thielman, a married couple living in Virginia, found out they were expecting their third baby later in their third decade of life, the pair quickly became experts on some medical statistics. For a woman who conceives a baby at age 25, there's about a 1 in 1,250th of a chance her baby will have Down syndrome. When a woman conceives at age 40, that chance rises to about 1 in 100.
When I was pregnant, because of my age, they strongly encouraged genetic screening. So I said, okay. And I kind of knew something was up in the back of my mind. So we did the prenatal screening. The blood test came back showing a high possibility.
While every baby should be celebrated, that wasn't always the Thielmans' experience inside doctors' offices.
One of the doctors really pushed us towards abortion. I went to a lot of those appointments on my own because third child, we got this, we're good. And especially if my husband was not present, she would use very archaic language. Your child will be a burden on society. He will be mentally retarded. He will likely have to have surgeries, and that will make him even more retarded. Very archaic, hurtful language.
Instead of ever considering an abortion, the two decided to walk forward in faith. The Thielmans are devout Catholics and passionate about the pro-life cause. Jason Thielman is even chief of staff to Senator Steve Daines, chair of the newly formed pro-life caucus in the U.S. Senate. So in September of 2018, Andrew Paul Thielman made a welcome entrance into his home.
Andrew perseveres. He was in the NICU for 30 days. He had surgery for Hirschsprung's disease when he was 15 days old. And I think he was stronger than us at that time.
When Erin was later hospitalized for health issues of her own, the family learned pressure to abort their son with Down syndrome didn't end in the womb.
One of the doctors, he asked how much stress I'd been under, and I was like, well, I had an emergency C-section. The baby has Down syndrome. He had surgery when he was 15 days old. We just got him out of the 30-day stay at the NICU. Had some stress. He said, didn't you know you had the choice to abort your baby? You could have saved yourself and not been going through this had you had an abortion. And I was laying in my hospital bed, pretty weak, and I just told him, get out.
At about 9 months old now, baby Andrew is proving to be a gift to the Thielman family.
He's my pacifier. I mean, that's how I view him when Erin was sick and in the hospital and trying to manage the 3 kids. I just sit and hold him after getting the other 2 to bed or getting him up in the morning or in the middle of the night, and just holding him, I just felt a calm and peace.
He will just hug you right away or kiss you right away.
Big brother and sister Alexander and Abby, ages 8 and 6, are excited to have another sibling at home.
He's nice, and he smiles and laughs. He talks a lot. He's like, and like this. Sometimes when he speaks baby voice, it sounds like he's talking like something else. Yeah, and sometimes he kind of speaks in a dolphin, kind of like.
While big brother and sister may not be able to put it into words yet, their love for baby Andrew is obvious.
What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? I am in a baby picture frame.
For the adults in the family, the youngest Thielman has already brought some life lessons to light.
One of my favorite places to hike is Garden of the Gods in my hometown of Colorado Springs. And it's filled with red dirt, and it is so cool. so special, so unique, and so rare that having a child with Down syndrome is like finding that red dirt trail. You know, every child is a different path on the trail of life. But those with Down syndrome, I equate that to finding that really special red trail.
I think it's natural to have a lot of fear and apprehension and be angry. I mean, I had moments, and I know you had moments of just being angry about it, and you know, you have to go through kind of various stages of coming to understand and terms with that. All of that really disappeared when the baby was born, and that really, I mean, that's just so true.
It's almost as if baby Andrew is evangelizing to his family already at 9 months. And when you learn the meaning behind his name, it makes all the more sense.
All of our kids have an A name. We call them the A team, so Alexander, Abby, and Andrew. So we chose Andrew Paul after Saint Andrew and Saint Paul, the first and last apostles, praying that he would have the intercession of every apostle from Andrew through Paul.
With the intercession of the apostles, baby Andrew Paul Fielman might just evangelize the world. Thank you to the Fielman family for welcoming us into your home and sharing your heart with us. That's it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Be sure to reach us at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com or search for EWTN Pro-Life on social media. But before we send you off, we want to take a moment and commemorate the gift of fatherhood this Father's Day. A very happy Father's Day to my dad, Andy Zeltner, and to all the fathers and father figures out there in the world, the strong men who build up a culture of life. We asked you, our viewers, to send in photos of the father in your life, and we are overwhelmed with the response. We end this week's show taking a look at some of the strong fathers in this world. Take a look and remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.